Good day students, and welcome to this contact session for learner support in English for BES. This is code English 41. I'm Ms. Besaidenout and I'm going to focus today on some of the most important content that we have in this specific module. In Unit 1, I would like to concentrate on the cognitive domain. Now, this domain involves the knowledge and the development of intellectual skills, and it includes recall of specific facts, procedural patterns, and concepts that serve in the development of intellectual abilities and skills. What's important to note is that there are 6 major categories of cognitive processes. First of all, it's remembering, which is the simplest process. Now, that focuses on recognizing or recalling knowledge from memory, mostly. The second one is understanding. Understanding refers to constructing meaning from different types of functions. Now, this could be from written messages or activities like interpreting or exemplifying, for instance. The third cognitive process is applying. Applying refers to carrying out a procedure through executing or implementing. The fourth is analyzing. When we analyze, we break down materials or concepts into parts, and we should be able to see how these parts relate to one another, or how they interrelate or relate to an overall structure or purpose. The fifth one is evaluating. Now, this is judgment based on criteria and standards through checking and critiquing. And it includes critiques, recommendations, and reports that demonstrate evaluation. The sixth and the most complex process is the one of creating. This implies putting elements together to form a coherent or functional whole, or reorganizing elements into a new pattern through generating, planning, or producing. It thus requires that learners put parts together in new ways or synthesize parts into something new and different, thus creating a new form or product. Still part of Unit 1 is features of the learning process. Now, first of all, one needs the motivation to learn. Information input is taken up through our different senses and the cognitive processing of knowledge. Then it also entails reflection on the values and emotions that are related to the acquisition of knowledge. We learn by repetition, analysis, and practice, or the application of information. And last of all, also part of the learning process is the fact that we monitor the accuracy of our learned knowledge. When we come to Unit 2, one of the very important components is to focus on the communicative language teaching method. Now, this entails the teacher that has to facilitate the communication process between all the participants in the classroom, as well as between participants and various activities and texts. It means that you act as an independent participant within the learning teaching group. Now, this last role of the teacher is closely related to the objectives of the first role, and it also implies a set of secondary roles for the teacher, of which the first is being an organizer of resources, but also being a resource him or herself. Secondly, the teacher also becomes a guide within the classroom. The teacher is also seen as a researcher with much to contribute in terms of appropriate knowledge and abilities. We continue with a communicative approach by looking at looking at the following aspect. Sometimes teachers tend to focus too much on fluency and comprehensibility, and that may cause some anxiety when they use this type of method, especially if they see the primary functioning of teaching as preparing learners to take standardized or other kinds of tests. The reason why teachers are sometimes concerned in this case is because they are considering the possible deleterious effect in pair or group work or the imperfect modeling and learning error. Although the issue is far from resolved, it's interesting to note that research has found that it contradicts the notion that other learners are not good conversational partners because they cannot provide accurate input when it is solicited. In other words, research supports the value of the communicative approach. Communicative language teaching is best considered as an approach rather than a method. Although there's a reasonable degree of theoretical consistency that can be discerned at the levels of language and learning theory, it is at the levels of design and procedure where there's a lot of room for individual interpretation and variation. It could be that one version among the various proposals for syllabus models, exercise types, and classroom activities may gain wider approval in the future, giving communicative language teaching a status similar to other teaching methods. On the other hand, divergent interpretations might lead to homogeneous subgroups. Thus, teaching method and approaches have been adapted to our communicative need. Teaching language is not an easy task. It needs to be fascinating enough to eliminate the apprehension of the learners. For this specific reason, language teachers tend to adapt diverse methods to teach language more efficiently and more amusingly. The fast expansion and accessibility of technology allows language teachers to include various supplementary aids along with textbooks to teach language. For instance, different electronic boards, multimedia projectors, computers, audio and video equipment are making language teachers' duty easier and more attractive nowadays. Now we move over to Unit 3. Here we are going to focus on the difference between the direct teaching strategy and the indirect teaching strategy. Teaching of concepts, inquiry and problem solving are different forms of indirect instruction that actively involve your learners in seeking resolutions to questions and issues while they construct new knowledge. Indirect instruction is an approach to teaching and learning in which the process is inquiry. The content involves concepts and the context is a problem. The two models for teaching direct and indirect both have their own individual strengths and weaknesses, but neither needs to be mutually exclusive. Teachers should aim to embrace both strategies, providing opportunity and variety for learners. One should not limit yourself to just one strategy, as that would mean limiting learners to one direction of learning. Learners are diverse and learn in multiple ways. Thus, if you can incorporate both direct and indirect instruction, it will provide a good opportunity for you to embrace all the types of learning habits. Direct and indirect instruction have their strengths and weaknesses, as we said, which is important to understand so that lesson plans are appropriately and effectively designed. According to Borich, direct instruction strategies are best suited for the teaching of facts, rules, and action sequences. When wanting learners to come away from a lesson with strict factional knowledge, a direct instruction, presentation, or lecture format is best suited for the job. Learners benefit from the direct instruction when the objective is the attainment of content knowledge and facts, as direct instruction provides for teacher-to-learner instruction. On the other hand, if we look at indirect instruction, this is better suited for concept learning, inquiry learning, and problem-centered learning. It sets up a learner-to-learner learning process, with the teacher acting more as a guide or a moderator. It helps learners to learn higher-order thinking skills and also gives them a chance to link knowledge with real-world examples. An inquiry and discussion-based strategy, as an inquiry and discussion-based strategy, indirect instruction allows for learners to build their own concept and establish patterns. Now, what are some of the examples if we look at indirect instruction? First of all, we have problem solving, of which there are two major types, reflective and creative. It focuses on knowing the issues, considering all possible factors and finding a solution. The second example is reading for meaning. Here we focus on learners' curiosity about the printed symbols. Once they recognize that, like talk, it conveys meaningful messages. Thirdly, the use of questions to guide search and discovery. This is used to guide learners into discovering new dimensions of a problem or new ways to resolve a dilemma. The fourth is learner experience and use of learner ideas. Now, this method is useful to heighten learner interest and to organize subject content around learner problems. Furthermore, it tailors feedback to fit individual learners and to encourage positive attitudes towards a subject. The fifth is learner self-evaluation. When one gives learners an opportunity to reason out their answers, they and other learners can then suggest the needed changes that need to be made. Last of all, you can also make use of group discussion. This involves learners exchanging ideas with successive interaction among large numbers of learners. The teacher intervenes only occasionally to review and summarize, or may schedule periodic interaction to evaluate each group's progress and to redirect them where necessary. When we move to Unit 4, I thought it good to have a look at how we should approach listening activities in the classroom. First of all, let's look at two ways of helping students focus their attention during listening. What you could do is give a simple listening task, for instance, a table of information that students need or learners need to complete, or you could give one or two guiding questions before the exercise so that students need to listen and find their answers. To help them listen more carefully, introduce the topic beforehand so that they might be able to predict what they will hear. You can also divide the listening into stages. For instance, listening for main ideas and then listening again, but this time for details. If the listening text is exceptionally long, it might be useful to divide it into sections and then check the comprehension after each section. If a teacher would like to use a cassette recorder for intensive listening, you should play the whole text and check general comprehension. Play the part of the text again, pausing after particular remarks to see if students could catch what was said. And if it is necessary, the cassette may be rewinded a little way and then play the remark again. For this specific activity, I want you especially to consider if you had to set up certain questions for listening. What are the different types of questions that are useful in a listening exercise? And you will find lots of ideas in Unit 4 that you can have a look at. Next, let's consider, and it also relates to speaking and listening, the importance of non-verbal communication when interacting with learners. Here I do want you to go and read a bit more and go and be able to clarify what each of these non-verbal communicators say to you, what are the function of each of them. We have first of all gentle eye contact, secondly a kind facial expression, a warm tone of voice, expressive hand and body gestures, a relaxed disposition, a slow speech rate, brevity, and lastly, how do the words themselves have a function when we interact with our learners. We move on to Unit 5. Here, let's have a look at another method of teaching English, and this is the context support method. When learners are just learning to read, we need to choose books that really interest them. Boys, for instance, like cars, so it might be useful to choose a book with pictures and simple words about cars, because this will keep them interested and they will also enjoy it more. Girls, on the other hand, traditionally like dolls more, and so we can focus on a book about dolls and encourage their enthusiasm, because children actually look at something they can relate to. We also find that there are books that are especially written for kids that are only just learning to read, which might have a longer sentence on the one side of the page, and then on the other side, or the page just next to it, it might have a short phrase or a single word that the child can learn to read. You then read the longer piece, and the learner only reads the shorter version on the other side. There's still a debate raging on what approach to teaching reading works best. That is something the teacher must work out for him or herself, also considering the learner you are working with. The context support method associates pictures with words. It's particularly good to use in combination with phonics with the beginner readers. So you will choose a subject, in other words, that interests your learners, such as the cars or the dolls that we mentioned, and then find books on these things. By choosing the topics that your learner already has an interest in, you will find that they'll be far more interested in the books. Interest and attention can sometimes be difficult to hold in younger learners, and those are two of the things that are very necessary if you want to learn or to teach a child to read. Next, you are simply going to read the books together. There are books on the market designed for this method of teaching a learner to read, as we said. For example, you get a book with a picture of the car, and one side may simply say car, and the other one, the car is blue. In time, the learner will actually start recognizing the word car. Once this happens, you can have the learner read the longer sentence which you have been reading. Since the learner then knows how the story goes, so to speak, they will also learn to recognize the words in the longer sentence. So that, in short, is that specific context-based method. Unit 6. Here it is interesting for me to look at how we can encourage our learners to engage with the local community and narrating short stories, and especially to look at why is it so useful, what are the benefits of this specific process. Now, the key reasons why we encourage learners to engage with the local community in storytelling is the following: to emotionally feel what other human beings feel that we haven't. To emotionally feel what other human beings feel that we have also felt. Thirdly, to see ourselves in a story, and to see ourselves as what we'd like to be, or to find friends in the characters we'd like to have as friends. It could also be that it offers a cautionary tale. That refers to what happens when we forget the humanity of others and inflict horrible atrocities on those we consider our foes. Stories in the community might act as something that purges. For instance, we think of Aristotle that spoke of a catharsis, where the audience would be purged of all its guilt, shame, and fear by watching a Greek tragedy. It can also be useful to teach a history of a culture, to endow morals and principles on our young learners. It can distract or divert our attention from the tough realities of life. Furthermore, it might be there to entertain or to teach, to entice, to provoke, to incite, to intellectually stimulate, to inspire, but also to predict or shape the future, and to shape and change social prejudice. Stories give our lives meaning, it imparts religious doctrines, but it can also be to punish or to scare children, and it can also express beauty. Society passes on its values and uses stories to show us our reflection, however hard it may be to look at. It also shows from where we come and where we are heading. Storytelling is how we make meaning out of the chaos of our human existence. It provides us with shape so that our lives have a beginning, a middle, and an end, and we can feel like we've meant something and we've left our mark on the world. If just one person can tell just one iota of our life story, then we have a narrative and we're the protagonist in our own life story. This is why we create stories, and this is why we need storytellers in our local communities. So in one very short sentence, stories are there to entertain as well as to educate us. This brings us to Unit 7. And now we're on the topic of poetry. How can you as a teacher encourage and help your learners to get involved in writing his or her own poem? Firstly, you must start to choose books of poetry and read some poems aloud with the learner. Talk about where each line of the poem ends and how it creates rhythm, affects the meaning, and might even make the poem look a particular way. You could sing a favorite song together and write down the lyrics. Ask the learner to write a poem that he or she could sing to the melody of the song. You can use the structure of the original lyrics as a guide. Another good idea is a neighborhood poetry walk, where you can stop at various points, for instance the park or the street corner, and ask the learner to write a sentence or two that describes what he or she sees. At home, the learner can perhaps revise and shorten those sentences and turn them into a poem. Then lastly, another very good idea is to teach them how to write acrostic poems. Now this means you take a person's name and each line spells out his or her name when read top to bottom. Once the learner writes a poem based on his or her own name, the learner can start writing it about friends, family members, or pets, any topic actually. Learners write their names or key vocabulary in capital letters down the left side of the page. They then insert a word that begins with each vocabulary word. It may be helpful to brainstorm first. The words that you can use can be descriptive, or they can refer to the things that are important to the learner, for instance, a favorite sport or musician. This brings us now to our last unit, which deals with assessment. In Unit 8, I want to specifically highlight the different types of assessment that we should be able to deal with as teachers. The first is formative assessment. Now this refers to any means by which learners receive input and guiding feedback on their relative performance to help them improve and absent their grade. It can be provided by face-to-face contact or in written comments on problems or papers or through emails, and it can be used as a measure for the learner to measure his or her learning on a daily, ongoing basis. The second type of assessment is summative, and this refers to the tests and quizzes and any other graded course activities that are used to measure learner performance. It's usually cumulative and often reveals what learners have learned at the end of a course. Thirdly, we have something called diagnostic assessment. Now this is usually used to diagnose the strengths and the area of need in all learners. It involves the gathering and careful evaluation of detailed data using the learner's knowledge and skills in a given learning area. In the fourth place, we look at continuous assessment. This should be planned and scheduled at the beginning of the year and be kept as simple as possible. Marks can be given for class activities, assignments, homework, or short tests on the completion of a topic and can be recorded for continuous assessment. Last of all, we look at integrative assessment. This type of assessment is designed to help learners discover and understand the connections between knowledge, skills, and graduate attributes that they learn throughout the different lessons. Then we also, I forgot about this very last one. It is also a way of assessment, but it's an informal way. This can also be called authentic or alternative assessment, and it allows teachers to track the ongoing process of their learners regularly and often. While a standardized test measures learners at a particular point in the year, ongoing assessments provide continual snapshots of where learners are throughout the school year. Something that's important to consider as well is, why do we assess? What motivates us to assess, and what is the function of assessment? Therefore, I want us to focus on our last topic for today, the role and importance of assessment in terms of education. In the first place, assessment helps teachers to gain insight into what learners understand, and that enables them to plan and guide instruction as well as to provide helpful feedback to learners. On the other hand, it helps learners to develop awareness on how they learn and to use this awareness to adjust and advance their learning. It also informs learners, teachers and parents, as well as the broader educational community, of achievement at a certain point in time in order to celebrate success. It enables the teacher to plan intervention and support continued progress. Very importantly, assessment must be planned with a purpose in mind. Assessment for and of learning all have a role to play in supporting and improving learner learning and must be appropriately balanced. One of the most important things or parts of assessment is the interpretation and use of the information that is gleaned for its intended purpose. It should be embedded in the learning process, tightly interconnected with the curriculum and instruction. Both teachers and learners work towards the achievement of curriculum outcomes, and here assessment plays a constant role in informing instruction, guiding the learner's next steps, and checking progress and achievement. There are many different processes and strategies for classroom assessment, and they can be adapted to suit the assessment purpose and needs of the individual learners. Thank you, students. That concludes our contact session for today. I want to leave you with a final few thoughts here. When you prepare for the examination or when you handle any assignment, it's very important that you consider how questions are formulated. Please always look at the action verbs because they will tell you which thinking processes are important. There's a table of verbs that you will find in section 7 in the beginning of the study guide, and it's important that you familiarize yourself with all those verbs because that will enable you to most effectively answer the questions both in assignments as well in your coming exams in all your subjects. If you have any problems or you have any questions that you would like answered that were not answered today, you are very welcome to contact me. Please send me an email so that I can give you a detailed response. If that is not possible, please SMS the code of your subject to this number 081 251 2987, and that will allow me to phone you back at a time that's appropriate for the both of us. Thank you very much for your time, and I wish you all the best of luck. Goodbye.